I'm gonna get started.
Awesome.
First I'd like to say thank you, Jay, for having me. And as a note, as I start, I won't be accepting questions until the end, please. My talk lasts for about 21 minutes, 21.
Ooh.
And it's called How to Tell Time in the Yucatan. So in spring 2019, my girlfriend and I went on vacation in Cancun, and it was lovely to sip drinks on the beach and to see the sights in Chichen Itza. But something I unexpectedly ended up enjoying quite a bit was shopping with the street vendors. Stuff like that usually ends up being like a tourist trap. So at first, I just wanted to grab some street tacos and head back to the hotel. But once I got there, there's a market square in Merida that I was primarily at. I saw that there were pretty much no tourists, but there were hundreds of locals just walking around with their families to enjoy the market and the beautiful weather. So each shop there was pretty unique for the most part. There were the standard like taco stands and souvenir shops for the few tourists that do end up there, like myself. But there were primarily more interesting options like bookstores and bespoke wood shops. It's like kind of a novelty, but you could name a type of animal, and the craftsman would whittle that animal out of a block of wood while you walk around the market for an hour or so. None of these pictures are mine. They're just examples of the stuffs. Anyway, I saw a shop that was pretty interesting. It was actually the most interesting, and it had less of a theme and more of a vibe. It's pretty big. The shop was larger than my apartment, and everything was just like scattered around. There were some things I couldn't tell if they were like tools for building other things or if those were the things for sale. There was like a table. Maybe you've seen something like this. It had like, instead of having something rigid, it had like rope for legs. It's called an impossible table. I thought that was pretty cool. And there was like a morphing chair bed table thing made out of woods and springs. It was kind of hard to describe, but hopefully you get the idea. And everything there was made out of metal or stone or wood, but nothing at all plastic. It was kind of like steampunky in that way. So I'm at the shop in Merida, and I'm the only one there. There's also the owner who was there, and it's surprising because it was so big. But the owner came up to me, and his name was Apo, and he was about 70 years old, and he only spoke Spanish and Mayan actually. But he told me in Spanish that he lived there in the shop, and he had built everything in the shop himself. So I had some time to kill, and Oppo's shop was the most interesting that I'd seen. So I stuck around a while, and there was just so much to look at. One device in particular was like a series of tubes arranged in a circle or a sphere like 10 feet in diameter. This is like kind of what it's like. This has holes everywhere, but the one in Oppo's shop had only 2 holes on either side. So the trick is you of the tube, and you walk around to the other side 10 feet away, and when you get there, it'll repeat what you said but backwards, like a record player would do or something. I don't understand how it works, but it was very cool to like watch it live. Everything in the shop had some twists like that, whereas more than you would expect, but the tubes were the first thing that really surprised me. I guess he got excited that I was excited, so he showed me one more thing, which is the focus of my talk. Sorry for the long prelude, but I wanted to like set the scene. So he took me behind a curtain into what appeared to be like a small workshop, but I didn't recognize anything in there. There was stuff like scattered, small things, big things. Some were like smashed on the ground out of frustration or something. And in the back of the workshop, there was a huge oil painting on the biggest easel I've ever seen. The painting was just a simple big black circle in the middle of the painting, and it was huge. It was probably 6 feet tall and 12 feet wide. And the circle was about here. And you could see the texture of the canvas, but the ink was so dark you couldn't see any texture at all. At least not from where I was, you couldn't see anything. So I went up closer to get a better look. When I'm up on the painting, and then a hand emerges out of the painting, grabs the watch from off my wrist, and goes back into the painting. And so it's obviously a magic trick, so I'm like smiling, but I don't see anyone like behind the easel, which is where they would hide. I didn't understand at all how it worked. So then Oppo, he walked behind the easel, and he reached his hand towards the backside of the painting, and his arm disappeared into nowhere. And when he pulled it out, he was holding my watch. He gave me the watch back and said with a huge smile, as if he's done this before, the front precedes the back by several seconds. I didn't understand it, like must have been a trick with the easel, but it was like hiding a person, like in the movie, in The Prestige. But I gave it a pretty close look and there was nowhere to hide any of this stuff. So Oppo tells me, he's no longer smiling, but he says, this is a gate of seconds, and you could use it in either direction to connect with either the past or the future within the span of a few seconds. I didn't make sense to me at all, but I immediately believed him. And he told me that he had painted also a gate of 20 years. And so asked if a whole person could go inside in order to visit the past. So Oppo, of course, was expecting me to ask that question. So he sat down on the table behind him and told me about a man named Fabio who visited his shop before I did, some time ago. So Fabio was a silver trader, and he was 22 when he visited the shop. And Oppo showed him both gates, just like I had seen. And Fabio immediately went into the gate of 20 years to travel to the future. He stepped into the painting and reached his destination, but he was surprised that Merida would not change so much in 20 years. And he walked through the familiar marketplace and was stopped by a fortune teller on the street. The fortune teller says, "Young man, would you like to know the future?" Fabio laughed and said, "Oh, I know the future." The fortune teller responded and said, "Surely you want to know if wealth awaits you." Fabio says, "I'm only a silver trader and I know it does not." "Can you be so sure?" says the fortune teller. "What about Fabio Cocon, who also began as a silver trader?" Fabio was so surprised to hear his own name from a stranger, so he asked other people in the marketplace if they knew where to find Fabio Cocon. When he got to the house he was directed to, it was bigger than he could have imagined, with even a servant to greet him at the gate. Once he got inside, though, he felt that something was wrong and he didn't belong there. Couldn't tell what it was. He was about to leave, but then his older self appeared. "At last, you are here. I've been expecting you." "You have?" the younger Fabio says. "Of course, I visited my older self, just as you are visiting me. It had been so long that I forgot the exact day. Come eat with me." The meal was as extravagant as the palace of a home that Fabio was in. They had a long meal and a long talk, but the older Fabio gave few details to explain his wealth. He mentioned a wife, but said it was not yet time for the younger Fabio to meet her. Instead, he asked the young Fabio to remind him of the regular stuff in his life and of the friends that the older Fabio had mostly long forgotten. Finally, the younger Fabio became more direct and asked how he would become wealthy. "I marked on a map a place 20 miles from Merida. The roads are too narrow for a car, but you can take a horse. Near the tree that is furthest west, there is a large rock. Dig underneath that rock, and you will find what you need." Fabio went back to his own time and did as his older self instructed, and he found a chest filled with gold coins. He took the chest to his home and immediately went back to Oppo's shop to travel to talk with his older self. The older Fabio asked, "How did you know where the treasure was?" The older Fabio replied, "I learned it for myself, just as you did." Fabio returned to his home and used the gold to buy high-quality silver to sell and workmen to help him distribute. He married a beautiful and clever woman who gave him the advice to diversify his sales, and eventually Fabio became wealthy. He gave generously to the poor and lived happily until his death at an old age. When Oppo finished telling me the story, he could tell that I was already considering, like, of course, the reality of it, but I was asking if I could try such a thing to enter the painting myself. Although he'd already made up his mind to tell me another story, so he went ahead. Separately, a carpenter named Gabor also visited Oppo's shop some time ago. He had heard the story of Fabio and immediately stepped through the gate of 20 years to seek out his older self. He was sure that he would be as rich and generous as the older Fabio. When he arrived at the Merida of the future, he immediately went to the wealthy district of the city. He asked if anyone knew where he could find Gabor Canul, and he was prepared to identify himself as Gabor's son, newly arrived from Mexico City. Though he never got a chance to offer the story since no one recognized his name. Eventually, he returned to his old neighborhood, and he spied on the house that he lived in during his own time. He recognized a man walking out of the house as himself, and the younger Gabor was shocked, angered, and disappointed that he still lived in the same old house. He would never become wealthy, and his older self would have no advice for him, at least nothing valuable. The older Gabor left and was followed by a rather plain woman who must have been his wife. The younger Gabor walked to the door, and his own key still fit inside the lock, so he entered. But he walked in with disgust at how simple and torn his furnishings were, and then he went to the wooden chest where he normally kept his savings. And when he opened the chest, he saw that it was full of gold coins and jewels. He was so confused. Why would his older self have a chest of gold and not use it to make his life more luxurious and comfortable? He decided that the money should belong to someone who appreciated it, and that was himself. To take his older self's money would not be stealing, because it was he himself who would receive it. So he took the entire chest from the house and brought it through the gate of years to his own time. With his new riches, he bought the finest clothes and furniture, rented an expensive and large house in the wealthy district, and hired a cook to prepare meals for him and his guests. He flaunted his money everywhere, which inevitably attracted the attention of many women, until he was finally married. Unsurprisingly, the wedding was extravagant, and the couple lived happily in the luxurious house, at least for a while. A few months after the wedding, Gabor returned home from his day's business to find his house broken into and his wife missing. While measuring the damage to his property, he found a ransom note that said to prepare 10 million pesos by the following day to arrange for his wife's return. At one point, Gabor had that much money, but he had carefully spent much of it. He gathered everything he had and hoped that it would be enough for the kidnappers. The next morning, Gabor handed over all his money, and the robbers accepted the ransom, returning his wife. She told him, "I didn't believe you would pay so much money for me." He responded, "I could not take pleasure in it without you, but now I regret that I cannot buy you what you deserve." She responded, "You need never buy me anything again, but I know you did not inherit all your money. Did you steal it?" "No, it was given to me. It's not really a loan, but I will need to pay it back." So together, Gabor and his wife became extremely frugal, saving everything they could and putting it into a wooden chest. They moved back into Gabor's old house and would repair their furniture when it became worn instead of buying new. And at first, their savings actually enriched the couple's love for each other, but eventually their love faded, and they grew to resent each other for the money that they could not spend. The years passed, and Gabor grew older, waiting for the second time that his gold would be taken from him. Apo finished his story, and I also didn't know what to make of it. I wasn't sure if Gabor's life had been enriched or not by his entering the painting. I suppose things were always destined to happen like that, especially since Gabor always needed somewhere to take the gold from in the first place. I was thinking about free will when Apo, as excited as ever, told me one more story, one that overlapped with the story of Fabio Cocon. Colel had been married to Fabio for many years, and they were extremely happy together, living in their large house in the wealthy district of Merida. One day, she saw her husband dining with a young man whom she recognized as the very image of Fabio when they first started dating. After the younger Fabio had left, Colel demanded to know who that was, and the older Fabio told her, for the first time, the story of his fortune. Colel asked if he found out from his older self that he would marry her, and Fabio answered no, and that he did not tell his younger self either. "I knew I would marry you from the moment I saw you, but not because anyone had told me. Surely you would not wish to spoil that moment for him." A few days later, Fabio left on a business trip, and Colel was left anxious and lonely. She missed her husband, but was encouraged by curiosity and nostalgia, and she missed the memory of his younger self even more. She went to the market, found Apo's shop that was described to her by her husband, and stepped through the gate of years to the Merida of her youth and of a young Fabio. She easily found her husband to be in the town, since she knew where he lived, even though it was before they met. Watching him in secret, she felt a strong desire for him. She'd always been a faithful wife, but this was kind of a gray area in the realm of cheating. So she proceeded. She rented a house, she got some light furnishings, and she went back to the market to try to woo the young Fabio. In the market, Colel saw him enter a shop in the jeweler's district. She followed him inside and saw him trying to pawn a necklace with emerald gemstones. Bring it back tomorrow, and I will pay you 5,000 pesos, said the jeweler. Colel recognized the necklace he was selling as a gift he would give to her just before their wedding. She didn't know that he'd tried to sell it, but she knew he must have been unsuccessful, since she would eventually receive it herself. Fabio agreed to the price, and he quickly left, without noticing or paying attention to Colel. She was about to follow him to try to capture his attention when she overheard two other men talking nearby. Did you see that necklace? It is one of ours. Are you sure? Said the second man. I am. That is the son of a bitch who dug up our test. Let's come back tomorrow. After he has sold the necklace, we will take his money and more. Colel quietly left the shop so she wouldn't draw attention to herself. She realized that the treasure Fabio had dug up must have belonged to thieves, and these were two members of the gang. They must have been sneaking around the jeweler's district to find the person who had stolen from them. In order to save the life of her future husband, Colel came up with her plan and quickly went back through the Gate of Years and retrieved her own necklace. Sure enough, it was the same as she remembered. Next, she went back to the gate, but instead of returning to the past, she visited the Merida of 20 years in the future. She sought out her older self and found her, again, without too much difficulty. The younger Colel had a plan and was about to tell her older self, but of course, she already knew the details. The older Colel fetched her own necklace from a jewelry box, and the pair returned, twice through the Gate of Years, and went to the jeweler's shop. Inside the shop, the two thieves from the previous day were there waiting, and they had brought a third man, whom the Colels assumed was the captain. Fabio entered the shop as well, and presented the necklace to the jeweler. As it was being examined, the younger Colel walked up and said, "What a coincidence! I wish to sell a necklace just like that." And she pulled out a necklace, her own, to show the jeweler. "This is remarkable," said the jeweler. "I have never seen two necklaces more similar." Then the older Colel pulled out her own necklace. "I don't believe it. The seller sold this to me, promising that it was unique. He must be a liar." "Perhaps you should return it," said the younger Colel. "That depends," replied her older self. "How much is he paying you for it?" she asked Fabio. 5,000 pesos. "Really, jeweler, would you care to buy this one too?" The jeweler responded, "I must reconsider my offer." As they bargained, the younger Colel stepped back to hear the leader of the gang scold the other men. "You fools, it is a common necklace. We could have killed half the jewelers in Merida, and we'd be finished." The thieves left the shop, and Colel knew she was successful. The older Colel quickly left, saying she would return the necklace to the man who sold it to her. Now alone, Colel said to Fabio, "Looks like neither of us will sell a necklace today. Would you walk me home to keep me safe from being robbed?" Fabio agreed to walking her home, and to coming inside, and to having a bit of wine, and to going into the bedroom. Colel was excited at how smoothly each of her plans had been executed, but was surprised and disappointed to see that in bed, Fabio was completely unable to please her. She was surprised because she remembered that when they were dating, he was already very confident and completely capable of handling her. At first she was confused, but then the answer became clear. So every afternoon, for the rest of Colel's vacation from her own time, she invited him to her rented house to instruct him in how to please her, and she took greater enjoyment than when she had met him as a young woman. Colel returned to her own time just before the older Fabio returned from his trip. She greeted him lovingly, but kept her secrets to herself. That's the end. That was an adaptation of a story by Ted Chiang called The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate. My roommate lent me a collection of Ted Chiang's stories called Exhalation, and since reading it, I'd wanted to present it in a format like this. I thought it was fun, a little bit scary, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. And I encourage you to check out Ted Chiang's other works. I've read 2 of his collections of short stories, and they're very solid, definitely thinkers. Back to you, Jay, unless we have questions.
That was so cool. I haven't heard a story in a long time.
I know. Kind of felt like elementary school there, being read to.
Yeah. With the same level of excitement.
That's funny.
I liked I hope it came off. I wanted to open with something where it's like, oh, Dan's talking about an experience, and it's going to turn into like a TED Talk. No, the whole thing's a story.
Wait, so you read the book and then you changed and adapted it in order to fit this format?
Yeah, so I really did go to Cancun last year, and so I made this setting there. And the original story happens in Cairo and Baghdad,
Okay.
and has a different ending actually.
Okay.
So check it out. It's the first story, and actually my favorite of like the 20 or so that I've read.
Okay. Please, can you send the
Yeah.
send it in written forms? And then that is so cool. That was you're a great storyteller.
Thanks. I've never done anything like that ever before, but my mom actually, like on rainy days in school, she would actually come to the elementary school and tell stories like that to 1,000 like first graders or whatever.
And they would just be like ready, like they're
Yeah.
all, yeah, that's crazy. That's a skill set. That's an amazing skill set. Oh my gosh.
Dang. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.